America invented spray cheese, canned cheeseburgers, deep-fried butter, and a burger served between two donuts and somehow called it lunch. And that is barely scratching the surface of 111 food inventions so disgusting, so ridiculous, and so aggressively American that the rest of the world watched in complete confusion, while the FDA quietly had a breakdown trying to classify all of it. Stick around, because this list only gets worse from here. Or hit subscribe because by point 50, you are going to need someone to process this with. And drop a comment telling us which one you have actually eaten, because we already know some of you have. 1. Spray cheese in a can, launched in 1966. And somehow America looked at pressurized aerosol dairy foam and said, yes, this is progress. The government could not legally decide if it was real cheese or a science experiment, so it became its own mysterious category. And families proudly brought it to barbecues, and kids skipped the cracker entirely and sprayed it directly into their mouths like dairy whipped cream. Grocery stores still move around 70 million cans every single year. Somewhere in Wisconsin, a traditional cheesemaker quietly weeps, while Americans aggressively decorate Ritz crackers with fluorescent orange confidence. 2. Pork brains in milk gravy has been sitting on southern grocery shelves since the 1950s looking exactly the same and refusing to apologize. One single serving contains 1,170% of the recommended daily cholesterol, which means it does not gently suggest heart disease, it personally delivers it. The can design has never been updated, which somehow makes it more threatening. Grandmothers fry it up for breakfast, while doctors stare at lab results in disbelief. Nutrition labels try their best, but the product simply exists beyond modern dietary logic and continues calmly waiting in aisle 7. 3. Pre-combined peanut butter and jelly was patented in 1971 because someone decided making a sandwich was simply too exhausting for the American spirit. The idea looked innocent until the sugars in the jelly and the proteins in the peanut butter began chemically reacting inside the jar, like a middle school science fair volcano. Within days, the bright red swirl turned into a disturbing brown substance that looked like regret. Parents opened the lid and silently reconsidered their life choices. It was discontinued so quickly most Americans never knew it existed, which honestly might have been the most merciful decision in processed sandwich history. 4. Pop Rocks were invented in 1956 when chemist Bill Mitchell was trying to create instant Kool-Aid and accidentally trapped carbon dioxide inside sugar crystals like tiny edible grenades. Kids poured them into their mouths and experienced fireworks on their tongues while parents watched in horror. Then a rumor spread across America that eating Pop Rocks with soda would cause your stomach to explode. The company begged people to stop believing it, but fear travels faster than candy. Sales collapsed not because the product failed, but because America collectively imagined spontaneous internal combustion. 5. Coolicles were born in the Mississippi Delta when someone stared at a perfectly normal dill pickle and thought, what if this was aggressively red? Whole pickles were soaked in Kool-Aid powder until they glowed like a traffic signal and tasted like sweet, briny confusion. School cafeterias sold them. Convenience stores stacked them proudly. Generations of Mississippi kids grew up believing neon red cucumbers were a completely reasonable snack. Food historians now study them with straight faces, while outsiders stare in disbelief, wondering how a pickle became a dessert. And no one stopped it. 6. The Luther Burger came out of Georgia and answered a question nobody responsibly asked, which was what if the bun was two glazed Krispy Kreme donuts? A beef patty with bacon and cheese was wedged between sugary dough halves and named after Luther Vandross, because apparently that made it classy. State fairs sold it for $12 while cardiologists updated their wills. People took one bite and experienced simultaneous joy and existential dread. It became a regional legend, proving that America does not separate breakfast from dinner. It simply stacks them together and deep fries the consequences. 7. Tang was invented in 1957 as a powdered orange drink so artificial that real juice companies proudly advertised contains no tang as a selling point. Then NASA adopted it for convenience, and suddenly millions of Americans assumed astronauts personally endorsed it as a health elixir from space. Parents stirred glowing orange powder into water, believing they were fueling future engineers. It tasted like citrus-flavored optimism mixed with laboratory equipment. Sykes' sales exploded because nothing says nutritious like space branding, even if the only thing it shared with astronauts was proximity to a vacuum-sealed container. 8. Jell-O. Imitation bacon flavor launched in the 1960s and forced Americans to confront a wobbling pink cube that claimed to taste like breakfast meat. Focus group testers described it as confusing to the brain, which might be the most polite review in food history. It looked like strawberry dessert but smelled like a diner grill at 6 a.m. Families sliced it, stared at it, and quietly questioned corporate decision-making. It was pulled from shelves quickly, but not before earning the title of most aggressively incorrect gelatin experiment ever attempted in American culinary development. 9. Our Kraft American cheese singles were invented in 1916, and the FDA initially refused to classify them as cheese, which should have been everyone's first clue. Kraft lobbied for decades until it was officially labeled pasteurized prepared cheese product, which sounds like a legal compromise rather than food. Americans did not care. They placed the glossy square on 4 billion sandwiches annually and watched it melt with suspicious perfection. Grilled cheese sandwiches achieved architectural stability thanks to a product that exists in its own dairy dimension, proving that texture will always win over technical definitions. 10. The heart attack. Grill in Las Vegas decided subtlety was overrated and served burgers containing up to 20,000 calories while customers wore hospital gowns for fun. Hot in 2012, 2 real customers suffered heart attacks inside the restaurant, and a spokesperson died of one the following year. The owner called it inevitable and continued serving towering burgers with fries cooked in lard. Tourists lined up anyway because nothing says vacation like medically themed irony. It became less of a restaurant and more of a live-action warning label that Americans treated like dinner theater with extra cheese. 11. Scrapple was invented by German settlers in Pennsylvania in the 1700s, who looked at leftover pig scraps and decided absolutely nothing goes to waste in this house. They boiled mysterious pork parts with cornmeal into a loaf, sliced it, and fried it until crispy enough to stop questions. It was made from pieces too undesirable for any other product, which somehow made it a regional treasure. Mid-Atlantic families still serve it for breakfast with pride, while visitors politely chew and pretend to understand. Food historians call it resourceful. Outsiders call it a brave decision. 12. Postum was invented in 1895 as a caffeine-free coffee substitute made from wheat bran and molasses because its creator believed coffee caused brain damage. Newspaper ads boldly claimed real coffee led to nerve exhaustion and insanity, while Postum promised calm domestic bliss in a mug. The American Medical Association investigated and found zero evidence, but the ads kept running anyway. It sold for over a century before being discontinued in 2007, which caused loyal fans to panic and demand its return. It came back in 2013, proving America will defend even roasted grain water. 13. Circus peanuts were invented in the 1800s and somehow decided to be orange marshmallows shaped like peanuts but flavored like bananas. No one knows why this identity crisis was approved, but it has survived for over a century. They sit in candy aisles, glowing softly like outdated packing material. Survey after survey consistently ranks them as the most hated candy in America, and yet production never stops. Grandparents buy them out of nostalgia, while children taste them once and stare into the distance. It is the longest-running example of Americans politely tolerating edible confusion. 14. Campbell's patented canned spaghetti cooked inside a sealed can in the 1920s, and engineers openly worried it would turn into a pasty gummy mass at the bottom. It did exactly that. Instead of admitting defeat, they reformulated it 4 separate times, trying to convince gravity and physics to cooperate. Families opened cans and discovered noodles compressed into a suspicious tomato cylinder. Children ate it anyway because it was red and convenient. Eventually, it was abandoned, but not before proving that just because something can cook inside a metal container does not mean it should. 15. Reducing crackers were sold in American pharmacies in the 1920s with the bold claim that simply eating them would cause weight loss. They were plain bland crackers displayed next to actual medicine, as if carbohydrates had secret slimming powers. There was zero medical evidence supporting this, but they sold for 20 years anyway. Customers crunched politely, believing the magic was happening internally. Light doctors rolled their eyes while cash registers kept ringing. It was diet culture before diet culture existed, and it proved that Americans will absolutely buy a snack if it whispers the word reducing. 16. In the 1920s, Southern Americans began pouring salted peanuts directly into glass Coca-Cola bottles, and no one involved thought to explain themselves. The peanuts fizzed dramatically as salt met soda, creating a sweet, salty chaos scientists now study seriously. Gas station attendants watched customers casually drop legumes into carbonated beverages and nod in approval. It became a documented regional tradition passed down like family wisdom. Outsiders tried it once and blinked slowly. Southerners insisted it was perfect. It remains one of the few times America looked at a bottle of soda and decided it needed texture. 17. Moxie was invented in 1885 as a patent medicine tonic and tasted exactly like something designed to cure mysterious Victorian ailments. Reviewers described it as bitter medicine mixed with root beer, which somehow did not stop it from becoming one of the first mass-produced bottled drinks in America. Decades later, Maine declared it the official state beverage in 2005, despite nearly everyone outside New England reacting with confusion. Loyal fans defend it passionately, while first-time drinkers stare at the bottle like it personally offended them. It survives purely on regional pride and stubbornness. 18. Instant mashed potatoes were invented in 1962 and marketed as the futuristic solution to the exhausting process of boiling actual potatoes. Dehydrated flakes reconstituted with hot water promised creamy perfection in 4 minutes instead of 20. Families stirred the powder and pretended the texture was normal while quietly tasting salted cardboard. Convenience won the argument. Americans bought millions of boxes because time-saving felt modern and responsible. Thanksgiving tables across the country featured both real potatoes and the powdered version sitting side by side like a culinary experiment no one wanted to discuss openly. 19. Chicken fried steak was invented in Texas in the early 1900s when someone looked at beef and decided to cook it exactly like fried chicken, just to see what would happen. A cube steak was battered, deep-fried, and then drenched in white cream gravy with total confidence. The name alone confuses visitors who expect poultry and receive beef instead. It became the signature dish of an entire state, proving Texans do not ask permission from logic. Diners serve it proudly, while newcomers read the menu twice, wondering if they misunderstood basic farm animal categories. 20. Wheaties were invented in 1921 after a health clinician accidentally spilled wheat gruel on a hot stove and discovered crispy flakes instead of disaster. Originally named Washburn's Gold Medal whole wheat flakes, which no human could comfortably pronounce, it was mercifully shortened to Wheaties. What began as an accident transformed into America's most iconic breakfast cereal. Athletes appeared on boxes, convincing generations that flakes equaled greatness. Night children poured bowls believing they were training for the Olympics before school. It stands as proof that sometimes culinary innovation begins with a spill and excellent marketing timing. 21. Candy cigarettes were sold to American children starting in 1915, and somehow every adult involved looked at sugar shaped like tobacco and approved it enthusiastically. They came in realistic cigarette-style boxes complete with branding that felt suspiciously authentic. Kids would hold them between their fingers, pretending to exhale powdered sugar like tiny executives on a break. Over 110 years later, they are still legally manufactured and sold to children without interruption. Entire generations practiced fake smoking before middle school while parents shrugged and called it harmless fun. The marketing history textbooks still do not know where to begin explaining this one. 22. Spam was invented in 1937 by Hormel to sell pork shoulder, which was the part of the pig nobody wanted to deal with. During World War II, soldiers were served so much of it that Spam became military slang for anything unwanted and constantly repeated. Troops wrote songs about it while quietly resenting it. After the war, it somehow transformed into a grocery store staple, selling 7 billion cans annually worldwide. Families slice it, fry it, and defend it passionately. It remains the only product that turned battlefield fatigue into a long-term global business model. 23. Postum ran national newspaper ads claiming coffee caused nerve exhaustion, heart disease, and even insanity, which was a bold move considering most Americans were holding coffee while reading those ads. The American Medical Association investigated the claims and found absolutely no evidence supporting them. CW Post ignored the investigation entirely and continued printing the same warnings for years. Families nervously switched to roasted wheat beverages, believing they were saving their marriages and careers. It was less of a marketing campaign and more of a caffeine panic tour. Proving fear has always been profitable in the breakfast aisle. 24. The garbage plate was invented in Rochester, New York in 1918, and immediately abandoned all concepts of food separation. Fries were piled with macaroni salad, then topped with two meats, then drowned in hot sauce and onions until the plate resembled a construction project. College students embraced it as a rite of passage while locals defended it like cultural heritage. Outsiders stared at the layered chaos, wondering where the actual plate ended and the toppings began. Rochester residents take criticism personally because to them this is not a mess. It is edible civic pride served with a fork. 25. In the early 1900s, dairy companies across America added formaldehyde to milk and marketed it as sanitized and safer, which is a sentence that feels illegal just to say out loud. The preservative kept milk from spoiling, but also introduced a chemical normally associated with laboratories and biology class specimens. When the FDA banned it in 1906, dairy companies fought the decision for years, insisting consumers were overreacting. Parents poured it over cereal, believing they were serving wholesome nutrition. It remains one of the few times America looked at embalming fluid and briefly considered it breakfast appropriate. 26. Margarine was invented in 1869 and originally appeared white and suspiciously similar to lard, which immediately enraged American dairy farmers. They lobbied so aggressively that several states passed laws making it illegal to color margarine yellow because that shade belonged to butter. Wisconsin banned yellow margarine until 1967, which means nearly a century was spent arguing over condiment color. Families bought pale blocks and sometimes kneaded in coloring packets at home like dairy contraband. It was not just a spread. It was a political movement proving Americans will absolutely legislate the shade of their toast topping. 27. Red-eye gravy was born in the American South when someone looked at leftover ham drippings and decided coffee would improve the situation. The hot black coffee mixed with salty grease, forming a shiny circle that looked like a bloodshot eye floating in the pan. Instead of being concerned, people poured it generously over ham and biscuits and declared it a delicacy. Appalachian kitchens treated it as tradition passed down through generations. Visitors took cautious bites while locals nodded approvingly. It remains one of the few sauces in history that sounds like a warning, but tastes like home cooking. 28. Turducken exploded into American popularity in the 1970s and answered the question, what if Thanksgiving needed more birds inside other birds? A chicken was stuffed inside a duck, which was then stuffed inside a turkey, all carefully deboned and layered like poultry architecture. It required up to 13 hours of cooking and a level of confidence bordering on reckless optimism. Cajun butcher shops claimed invention rights, while families sliced into it like unveiling a holiday secret. Selling 5,000 in a single Thanksgiving week proved America believes moderation is optional when multiple species can fit into one oven. 29. Kool-Aid was invented in Nebraska in 1927, originally as a liquid concentrate before being reformulated into powder simply to reduce shipping costs. That single business decision turned it into one of the most culturally embedded drinks in America. Children grew up stirring bright colors into pitchers, while parents accepted neon beverages as normal hydration. The phrase, drinking the Kool-Aid, permanently entered the English language as a metaphor far beyond refreshment. What began as a cost-cutting measure became a national icon, proving that sometimes powdered sugar and food dye can accidentally reshape vocabulary itself. 30. Vienna sausages in a can became an American staple in the 1900s, featuring tiny pale sausages floating in a cloudy gelatinous liquid that no label has ever fully explained. The can opens to reveal what looks like a science demonstration in preserved meat physics. Families stack them on crackers with total seriousness while guests politely avoid eye contact. or at peak production, they sold 300 million cans annually, which means millions of Americans willingly embraced mysterious meat suspended in edible fog. It remains proof that if something fits inside a small tin, America will absolutely try to snack on it. 31. Pop-Tarts were invented in 1964 and immediately convinced Americans that pastry should live permanently inside a cardboard box. Kellogg's launched 29 additional flavors including watermelon and blue raspberry because subtlety was clearly not the goal. The hot fudge sundae version was even recalled in 2020 for catching fire inside toasters, which feels like an aggressive breakfast strategy. Kids grew up believing frosting with sprinkles counted as morning nutrition. Parents stocked them for convenience while quietly ignoring ingredient lists. Oddity became the only breakfast item that could simultaneously be frozen, toasted, or accidentally weaponized by kitchen appliances. 32. Carnation breakfast bars launched in 1975 as a compressed brick of oats and sugar, boldly marketed as a complete nutritious breakfast. Commercials featured a confident doctor in a white coat, assuring families this candy-shaped rectangle was responsible fuel. In reality, it contained more sugar than an actual candy bar, which felt like a technical oversight. Busy parents tossed them into lunchboxes believing efficiency equaled health. The FDA eventually challenged the claims and the bars quietly disappeared. It was America's first real attempt at convincing itself that dessert could wear a lab coat and pass for medical advice. 33. The High-C Ecto Cooler launched in 1987 as a Ghostbusters tie-in and glowed bright green like something found in a cartoon laboratory spill. Kids begged for it purely because it looked radioactive and connected to slime. When the Ghostbusters license expired in 1997, the company simply renamed the exact same drink and kept selling it for 4 more years because Americans refused to let go. Grocery aisles quietly stocked the identical green liquid under a new label. It proved that once a neon beverage captures childhood loyalty, licensing agreements become completely irrelevant. 34. The Monte Cristo sandwich became a diner staple by taking ham and cheese, dipping it in egg batter, deep frying it, then dusting it with powdered sugar and serving it with raspberry jam. It looked like dessert but tasted like lunch having an identity crisis. Restaurants such as Bennigan's and even Disneyland served it proudly as if savory meat wrapped in sweetness was perfectly rational. Diners sliced into it and experienced confusion followed by acceptance. It stands as one of the few sandwiches that demands syrup and mustard share the same plate without either one apologizing. 35. Hydrox cookies were invented in 1908 as the original chocolate sandwich cookie 4 years before Oreos even existed. When Oreos launched in 1912 as a near-identical copy, they somehow became more famous, convincing Americans that Hydrox was the knockoff instead of the pioneer. Grocery shoppers reached for the louder brand while Hydrox slowly faded into obscurity. It was discontinued in 1999 and relaunched in 2015 to an audience that barely remembered it. It remains the greatest case of dessert-level identity theft in American snack history, and the cookie never emotionally recovered. 36. Frito pie was invented in New Mexico in the 1960s and boldly rejected the concept of plates entirely. Fritos corn chips were poured directly into their own bag, topped with chili and cheese, and eaten with a spoon straight from the packaging. The Woolworth's lunch counter in Santa Fe sold it for 50 cents and locals treated it like sacred tradition. Outsiders questioned the structural integrity while residents called it genius. It became a protected cultural institution, proving that sometimes the best serving dish is the bag the chips already came in. 37. The Chicken McNuggets were invented in 1979 by a Cornell food science professor, hired specifically to solve the problem of portable chicken. Made from a paste of mechanically separated poultry, they were initially rejected by McDonald's before launching and selling 8 million in the first month. Parents ordered them for picky children while quietly choosing not to visualize the manufacturing process. Drive-through lines grew longer as dipping sauces multiplied. They permanently changed American eating habits and proved that once something can be shaped into a uniform nugget, logic becomes completely optional. 38. Cream of wheat was invented in 1893 by a North Dakota mill foreman who turned semolina porridge into a national breakfast icon, despite it having almost no distinctive flavor. For over 130 years, it was marketed using an advertising image later considered racially offensive, yet it remained unchanged for decades. Families stirred the smooth cereal on cold mornings believing blandness equaled wholesomeness. In 2020, the image was finally redesigned after cultural reevaluation. It stands as a reminder that sometimes the most controversial element of a food is not the taste, but the box it arrives in. 39. Welch's grape juice was invented in 1869 by dentist Thomas Welch, who pasteurized grapes to prevent fermentation and marketed it to churches as unfermented wine for communion. It was intended as a moral alternative, but accidentally became America's most popular juice brand. A Welch spent his life campaigning against alcohol, while his purple creation became inseparable from childhood lunches and plastic cups at family gatherings. Generations grew up associating grape juice with innocence and sticky fingers. It remains the only beverage born from prohibition activism that turned into a playground staple. 40. Tootsie Rolls were invented in 1896 as the first individually wrapped penny candy in America and immediately confused everyone with a texture that is neither chocolate nor caramel, yet confidently claims both territories. The company has refused to fully disclose the exact ingredient formula for over a century, which only adds to the mystery. Children chew them until their jaws ache while dentists quietly observe the business model. They have survived world wars, sugar shortages, and changing candy trends without altering their identity. It is the longest-running example of America committing to chewable ambiguity. 41. Franco-American canned gravy launched in 1887 and decided the best way to sell meat sauce was to give it a fake European accent. The name sounded like a Parisian chef whispering over a saucepan, yet the company was entirely American with zero French connection. Families poured it straight from the can onto mashed potatoes, believing sophistication had arrived at dinner. It was gravy without effort, dressed in borrowed culture. The branding did all the heavy lifting, while the contents quietly remained brown and practical. It proved Americans will absolutely trust a sauce more if it sounds vaguely continental. 42. Now, the cronut was invented in New York in 2013 and triggered a pastry-level economic crisis. This croissant donut hybrid caused Americans to line up at 6 in the morning while scalpers resold them for $100 each like black market baked goods. Multiple countries attempted to trademark the name, while every local bakery produced suspiciously similar versions within 30 days. Customers photographed them like celebrities before taking a single bite. It was less a breakfast item and more a social experiment, proving that if you combine 2 carbs with confidence, people will camp on sidewalks for dough. 43. Muscle milk launched in 2000 and boldly chose a name that immediately made half the country uncomfortable. Marketed as inspired by human breast milk, it promised athletic strength in a plastic bottle while containing high levels of saturated fat. Lawsuits followed, accusing the company of calling it healthy without sufficient evidence. Gyms stocked refrigerators with it anyway, and athletes chugged it after workouts without reading fine print. It generated hundreds of millions in annual sales, proving that in America, if a product sounds powerful enough, nutritional nuance becomes optional background noise. 44. Cactus Cooler became a beloved soda in the American Southwest, despite containing absolutely no cactus whatsoever. The orange pineapple drink was named after a cartoon character from the Flintstones and sold almost exclusively in California, Nevada, and Arizona. People who moved away reported craving it like homesickness in liquid form. Outsiders tasted it and shrugged, while locals defended it passionately. It became a regional identity marker disguised as a soft drink. Sometimes the flavor matters less than the geography, and this soda turned state lines into emotional boundaries. 45. Non-dairy creamer was invented in 1958 and promised to whiten coffee without involving a single drop of dairy. Its primary ingredient was hydrogenated vegetable oil, which sounded scientific enough to feel modern. Advertisements framed it as healthier than real cream while quietly avoiding deeper explanations. Decades later, studies revealed hydrogenated oils were more dangerous than the cream they replaced. Office break rooms across America had already committed to the powder. It was convenience disguised as innovation, and it permanently changed how Americans approach their morning caffeine ritual without ever meeting a cow. 46. Fluffernutter sandwiches were invented in New England by spreading peanut butter and marshmallow fluff onto white bread with total sincerity. Marshmallow fluff itself was created in Massachusetts in 1917 and quickly became a regional obsession. In 2006, a state senator attempted to limit fluffernutters in school lunches, citing nutrition concerns, and adults reacted as if history itself was under attack. Public protests shut the proposal down almost immediately. Grown residents defended the sandwich like a constitutional right. It remains one of the few times marshmallow spread sparked legitimate legislative drama. 47. Hot Pockets were invented in 1983 as a self-contained pocket of meat and cheese engineered for microwave convenience. The cardboard sleeve was specifically designed to crisp the outside, while the interior achieved molten lava temperature with ruthless consistency. Teenagers bit into them too quickly and learned painful lessons about patience. Despite the predictable burn hazard, they still sell over 1 billion units annually. Freezers across America remain stocked with these edible traps because convenience consistently wins against roof-of-mouth safety. It is the only snack that requires both hunger and bravery. 48. Cocoa Puffs launched in 1958 containing so much sugar that early nutritionists classified them closer to candy than cereal. General Mills reformulated slightly, yet the product still contains around 35% sugar by weight. Sonny the Cuckoo Bird has been enthusiastically losing composure for over 6 decades, promoting chocolate milk for breakfast as normal behavior. Children poured bowls while parents pretended the word cereal implied balance. It was dessert disguised as morning routine, and America collectively agreed that if the mascot seems excited enough, nutritional restraint can take a day off. 49. Mr. Pibb was created by Coca-Cola in 1972 to compete with Dr. Pepper, but originally launched under the name Peppo until legal threats forced a rebrand. The new title, Mr. Pibb, unintentionally suggested a lesser credential compared to a doctor, which did not help sales. It entered markets confidently and was outsold by Dr. Pepper almost everywhere it appeared. Consumers treated it like the polite understudy of soda. Despite never winning the rivalry, it continues to exist, proving that sometimes being second place is still profitable if carbonation is involved. 50. Candy buttons were invented in the early 1900s as small dots of sugar stuck directly onto a strip of paper, and no one solved the obvious design flaw for over a century. The candy fused to the paper so tightly that eating them required peeling off significant amounts of edible confusion. Children accepted the accidental paper consumption as part of the experience. Generations repeated the same ritual of biting carefully and pretending the texture was intentional. It remains the longest-running example of a manufacturing issue quietly rebranded as nostalgia, and nobody has fixed it. 51. Underwood deviled ham has been sold in America since 1822 and features a red devil on the label that looks more honest than the ingredient list. The small tin opens to reveal ground ham, spreadable enough to make anyone question what part of the pig just volunteered. The can design has barely changed since 1895, which somehow makes it feel immortal. It holds the title of the oldest trademarked food brand in American history and wears that achievement proudly. Generations have smeared it on crackers with confidence, proving longevity sometimes outruns curiosity. 52. Deep-fried butter debuted at the Texas State Fair in 2009, when someone froze sticks of butter, dipped them in batter, and lowered them into hot oil like destiny. It was served with honey as if sweetness would soften the concept. Abel Gonzalez Jr. even won a Most Creative Award, which suggests competitive frying is a respected art form. Crowds lined up to bite into molten dairy pockets while nutritionists stared at the horizon. It became the most talked about fair food in America, proving that if it can melt, someone will fry it. 53. Slim Jims were invented in 1928 as a portable meat stick made from mechanically separated chicken, blended with corn syrup and sodium nitrite. The ingredient list reads like a laboratory checklist, yet Americans consume around 1 billion every year without hesitation. The FDA investigated the manufacturing process in 2000 and found it technically compliant, which feels like the most neutral endorsement possible. Convenience stores display them near cash registers like edible impulse decisions. They snap loudly when bitten, which somehow convinces consumers that texture equals transparency and everything must be perfectly fine. 54. Diet Right. Cola launched in 1958 as America's first diet soda sweetened with cyclamate, promising guilt-free refreshment before anyone fully understood artificial sweeteners. For 11 years, millions drank it believing they had discovered calorie freedom in a bottle. In 1969, the FDA banned cyclamate after studies linked it to cancer, which turned yesterday's healthy alternative into today's regulatory problem. Customers blinked and switched brands without much ceremony. It was an early reminder that diet innovation sometimes moves faster than medical consensus, and the bubbles rarely pause for long-term research. 55. Squeeze. Parquet margarine arrived in the 1980s packaged in a squeeze bottle that literally spoke in commercials claiming to be butter. Legally, it could not call itself butter, so it simply implied superiority with cheerful confidence. Families squeezed liquid margarine onto toast while the bottle's voice echoed in their minds. Over 20 million units sold, proving Americans were comfortable taking breakfast advice from animated Condiments. It blurred the line between food and mascot-driven persuasion. If a plastic bottle insists hard enough, apparently toast does not demand credentials. 56. Ambrosia salad dominated American Thanksgiving tables by combining canned mandarin oranges, pineapple, maraschino cherries, mini marshmallows, and Cool Whip into something classified as both salad and dessert. It appeared on nearly 40% of holiday tables throughout the 1970s with total confidence. Guests spooned the pastel mixture onto plates next to turkey, without questioning how fruit cocktail became a side dish. Church cookbooks printed the recipe proudly. It remains the only salad in history that sparkles, jiggles slightly, and politely refuses to choose between dinner and sugar. 57. Rocky Mountain oysters are deep-fried bull testicles served at Colorado restaurants and state fairs under a name deliberately designed to sound harmless. Now tourists order them thinking seafood is involved and learn a rapid anatomy lesson instead. The town of Severance even hosts an annual festival drawing thousands of visitors, celebrating the concept with cheerful enthusiasm. Locals treat it as tradition, while newcomers chew thoughtfully and reconsider assumptions. It proves that clever naming can override biological clarity, and that Americans will try almost anything if it sounds adventurous enough on a menu. 58. Grape Nuts cereal was invented in 1897, despite containing neither grapes nor nuts, which feels less like branding and more like optimism. C.W. Post believed grape sugar formed during baking, but that theory never materialized into reality. The name simply stayed wrong for over a century and nobody corrected it. Bowls of tiny rock-like pellets required serious jaw commitment at breakfast. Dentists quietly appreciated the workout. Americans continued pouring milk over it anyway, proving that if a cereal sounds wholesome enough, factual accuracy becomes optional background decoration. 59. Yoo-hoo chocolate drink appeared in the 1920s as a water-based chocolate-flavored beverage that was not technically chocolate milk. Because it contained no real dairy, it required no refrigeration, which made it suspiciously shelf-stable. Dairy companies refused to classify it as milk, yet Americans bought around 100 million bottles annually for decades. Children shook the bottle, ignored the fine print, and enjoyed sweet brown nostalgia. It blurred the boundary between beverage and science experiment while proving that if it tastes like chocolate, few people demand documentation. 60. Candy corn was invented in the 1880s, shaped like tiny corn kernels made from sugar, corn syrup, and wax with unapologetic brightness. Every Halloween survey ranks it as the least favorite candy in America, and yet factories produce roughly 35 million pounds every year. Bowls overflow with tri-colored triangles that guests politely avoid until options run out. Families debate its texture annually as if rediscovering it for the first time. It survives purely on tradition and seasonal obligation, proving that in America, even universally criticized candy can achieve eternal shelf space. 61. Potted meat. food product has quietly existed on American shelves since the 1950s, and its official ingredient list reads like a dare. Mechanically separated chicken and beef mixed with partially defatted cooked beef fatty tissue somehow combine into something spreadable. Every word on the label feels increasingly specific and increasingly alarming. About 40 million cans sell annually, which means millions of Americans willingly purchase meat described with industrial precision. It slides out of the can with determined confidence and lands on crackers like it owns the room. Marketing never improved the name and somehow never needed to. 62. Deep-fried Oreos were introduced at the Los Angeles County Fair in 2002 when someone dipped standard cookies into funnel cake batter and lowered them into oil like a carnival experiment. The result became the single most replicated state fair invention in American history within 3 years. Powdered sugar rained down as crowds lined up for warm chocolate centers wrapped in fried sweetness. It transformed a grocery store snack into a deep-fried event. America looked at an already successful cookie and decided what it really needed was gravity-defying batter and more heat. 63. Wonder Bread launched in 1921 as perfectly soft white bread with most natural nutrients removed during processing. Americans embraced the fluffy slices enthusiastically until vitamin deficiencies began appearing nationwide. The FDA eventually required manufacturers to add synthetic vitamins back into the bread to prevent health problems. Companies then marketed the same product as enriched and advanced, which felt like selling back what was originally taken away. Sandwiches stacked high while advertising celebrated progress. It stands as one of the boldest examples of removing nutrition, restoring it artificially, and calling the entire process innovation. 64. Dr. Pepper was invented in Waco, Texas in 1885 and has guarded its formula like a classified government document ever since. The company claims it contains 23 secret ingredients, yet in a 1963 blind taste test, Americans could not reliably identify it. Marketing continued declaring it uniquely distinctive regardless of the data. Generations sipped it believing they were experiencing something impossible to replicate. The mystery became the flavor. It proved that if a beverage insists hard enough on its complexity, most consumers will nod respectfully and never request a detailed explanation. 65. Ice Velveeta was created in 1918 from cheese scraps and whey, and later forced by the FDA to label itself pasteurized prepared cheese product instead of simply cheese. The name adjustment sounded bureaucratic, but sales never slowed. Americans buy around $1 billion worth annually, primarily to melt into queso dip with unwavering dedication. It liquefies with suspicious smoothness and refuses to separate under pressure. Home cooks defend it passionately during game day gatherings. Legal definitions may hesitate, yet the chip bowl never does. It remains dairy-adjacent and completely unbothered. 66. Chicken and waffles became iconic in Harlem jazz clubs during the 1930s as an all-night meal that was neither breakfast nor dinner, but confidently both. Saw savory fried chicken met sweet waffles and maple syrup in a partnership that should have required negotiation. Musicians finished late sets and ordered it without blinking. Decades later, it evolved into a $500 million restaurant category across America. Diners drizzle syrup over crispy poultry like it is obvious logic. It represents the moment Americans decided meal boundaries were merely suggestions and sweetness could coexist with gravy. 67. Corn dogs required 3 separate American patents between 1924 and 1946 because multiple inventors insisted they alone perfected the hot dog dipped in cornmeal batter on a stick. The legal argument stretched on so long it outlasted 2 of the 3 claimants. Meanwhile, state fairs sold thousands daily, without concern for intellectual property drama, and then children clutched wooden sticks like edible trophies. The concept was simple, yet apparently revolutionary enough to spark decades of paperwork. It proved that sometimes innovation is less about invention and more about who files the most persistent documents. 68. Count Chocula cereal, launched in 1971 featuring a chocolate-loving vampire who somehow made breakfast feel slightly gothic. Early packaging included a Star of David amulet, which drew complaints from the Anti-Defamation League for religious imagery concerns. General Mills redesigned the box immediately, and the cereal continued selling every Halloween without further incident. Children poured chocolate-flavored milk into bowls while the Count smiled confidently from cardboard. It remains a seasonal tradition, proving that even supernatural mascots must occasionally consult public relations before serving sugar at sunrise. 69. Faygo soda began in Detroit in 1907, when Russian immigrant bakers converted frosting flavors into carbonated drinks with enthusiastic creativity. Decades later, rap group Insane Clown Posse adopted it as a concert ritual, spraying hundreds of bottles over audiences during shows. The beverage became internationally recognized less for flavor and more for chaotic stage showers. Fans left concerts sticky and triumphant. It transformed from bakery experiment to cultural spectacle, proving that sometimes a regional soda only needs one very committed fan base to achieve legendary status. 70. The Necco wafers were invented in 1847 as thin, chalky candy discs carried by Union soldiers during the Civil War. Their texture resembles compressed sidewalk dust, yet generations developed nostalgic loyalty. When the company went bankrupt in 2018, public outcry was so intense that another manufacturer quickly purchased the brand simply to revive it. Americans insisted the brittle pastel discs deserved survival. It stands as proof that even the most stubbornly dry candy can secure emotional devotion if it has existed long enough to outlive several historical eras. 71. Armour potted meat has been sitting on shelves since the 1920s, and the ingredient list reads like a technical manual for livestock leftovers. Mechanically separated chicken, partially defatted cooked pork fatty tissue, and beef tripe all gather inside a small can printed in the smallest legally permitted font. The product does not hide what it is, yet somehow never fully explains itself either. It spreads onto crackers with determined smoothness, while consumers politely avoid reading twice. It proves that if the label is transparent enough, Americans will accept almost anything as long as it is shelf-stable. 72. Garbage nachos became a restaurant chain obsession in the 1990s when casual dining decided restraint was outdated. Chains competed to stack the tallest towers of chips, cheese, meat, sour cream, and whatever else could physically remain upright. The category peaked when a Las Vegas casino served nachos covering an entire table, requiring 2 servers to deliver it like ceremonial furniture. Diners photographed the spectacle before attempting structural excavation. It was less an appetizer and more a construction challenge, proving that in America, portion size often replaces common sense as a primary marketing strategy. 73. Carnation. Instant breakfast launched in 1964, promising to replace a complete morning meal with a powder stirred into milk. Advertisements showed energetic families sprinting out the door, clutching glasses of beige confidence. Nutritionally, it contained less value than the plain milk it was mixed into, yet it generated $100 million annually for decades. Eventually, it was rebranded as Breakfast Essentials without changing much inside the packet. It stands as a reminder that if convenience sounds responsible enough, our Americans will happily trade chewing for stirring and call it progress. 74. Squeeze-It fruit drinks appeared in 1985, packaged in small plastic barrels topped with foil. You bit and squeezed like a hydration experiment. The liquid inside contained about 10% juice and the remaining 90% optimism and sugar. In 1990, twistable collectible caps were introduced and quickly became more popular than the beverage itself. Children hoarded caps like currency while the drink was secondary. When Squeeze-It was discontinued in 2001, millions of tiny caps remained as relics of sticky afternoons, proving sometimes the packaging wins the entire cultural battle. 75. Kraft Macaroni and Cheese debuted in 1937, offering pasta with powdered processed cheese that required little effort and even less reflection. Over time, versions appeared that required neither butter nor real milk, which felt like culinary minimalism reaching its peak. Ironically, the box bearing the boldest Kraft logo contains some of the least actual cheese in the company's catalog. Families stirred orange sauce into noodles with unquestioned loyalty. It became the ultimate comfort food paradox, where authenticity surrendered quietly to convenience and nobody demanded documentation at dinner. 76. Cincinnati chili over spaghetti emerged as a regional staple featuring chili seasoned with cinnamon, chocolate, and allspice poured directly onto pasta noodles. Locals call it a five-way when topped with beans and onions and defend it with civic intensity. Visitors approach cautiously expecting Italian comfort and receiving Midwestern innovation instead. The shredded cheddar melts into a bright orange blanket that refuses to apologize. Entire restaurant chains thrive on this combination, while outsiders blink slowly. It remains a sacred dish, proving some cities bond most tightly over culinary decisions that confuse everyone else. 77. Spam musubi was created in Hawaii by placing a block of spam on rice and wrapping it neatly in seaweed like a cross-cultural handshake. It became so beloved that every 7-Eleven in Hawaii sells it with casual pride. On the mainland, it reappeared in upscale grocery stores priced dramatically higher and described as artisan. The same processed meat suddenly wore a boutique costume. Locals smiled knowingly while tourists paid premium prices. It proves that context alone can transform a wartime canned protein into a fashionable snack with sophisticated branding. 78. Fruit Loops launched in 1963, presenting 6 vibrant colors that children naturally assumed meant 6 distinct flavors. In 2014, Kellogg's confirmed publicly that every single loop tastes exactly the same, regardless of color. For 51 years, Americans had been performing imaginary flavor analysis at the breakfast table. The revelation did not change sales at all. Bowls continued to fill with rainbow rings, while milk turned pastel. It stands as a monument to marketing illusion, proving that if cereal looks diverse enough, taste does not need to follow through. 79. Hawaiian Punch began in 1934 as a tropical ice cream topping before someone added water and realized it worked better as a drink. Over decades, the actual fruit content gradually decreased until the modern formula contains about 5% real juice. The name remained confidently tropical, while ingredients quietly simplified. Generations grew up believing bright red liquid equaled island adventure. Birthday parties featured it in large plastic bowls without hesitation. It proves that if branding stays sunny enough, percentages on the label rarely interrupt the vacation fantasy. 80. Pixie Sticks were invented in the 1950s, originally as a powdered drink mix called Fruzola, intended to be dissolved in water. Children ignored the instructions entirely and poured the flavored sugar directly into their mouths with fearless enthusiasm. Instead of correcting the behavior, the manufacturer simply repackaged the powder in paper straws and sold it as pure edible sugar. Parents watched wide-eyed as kids consumed energy in concentrated form. It remains one of the few times corporate strategy openly surrendered to playground reality and decided hydration was optional. 81. Dinty Moore beef stew has been canned by Hormel since 1935 and proudly named after a fictional Irish saloon keeper who never actually cooked anything. The recipe was engineered specifically to survive decades on a shelf without losing structural integrity or flavor, which taste testers confirmed by sampling cans stored for 10 years. The company presented this durability as the primary selling point, which is a bold culinary strategy. Families heat it during storms and camping trips with quiet trust. It proves that in America, longevity sometimes matters more than freshness. 82. The McRib appeared in 1981, shaped like a rack of ribs despite containing no bones whatsoever. The restructured pork patty was molded into rib form like edible architecture and sold seasonally to manufacture demand. Americans became so obsessed they created websites tracking its appearances with near-scientific precision. McDonald's later confirmed the scarcity was intentional, which only intensified loyalty. Fans lined up as if witnessing a comet. It stands as one of the greatest examples of fast food psychology, where absence increases appetite and a boneless rib becomes a cultural event. 83. Ovaltine arrived in America in the early 1900s, marketed as a Swiss health drink capable of transforming children into energetic success stories. See, the Little Orphan Annie radio show promoted it relentlessly for 12 years, and the famous decoder ring message later revealed in A Christmas Story translated into an Ovaltine advertisement. Children expected secret wisdom and received marketing copy instead. Parents stirred chocolate powder into milk, believing in nutritional miracles. It became one of America's earliest recorded disappointments, proving that sometimes the mystery prize inside the cereal box is simply more advertising. 84. Sun-Drop citrus soda was introduced in 1949, containing more caffeine than Mountain Dew, yet remaining almost unknown outside the southeastern United States. Devoted fans who relocate often ship cases to themselves because local stores refuse to acknowledge its existence. The bright yellow bottle glows with regional loyalty rather than national fame. Outsiders taste it once and move on, while loyalists treat it like a cultural heirloom. It proves that some sodas do not need nationwide dominance as long as they secure fierce devotion within carefully guarded state lines. 85. American cheese food is an official FDA category, distinct from both American cheese and American cheese product, which already sounds like a bureaucratic comedy routine. This version contains even less real cheese than the others, yet legally occupies its own dairy-adjacent classification. The FDA maintains multiple cheese-related categories, none of which are allowed to simply say cheese without qualifiers. Shoppers rarely notice the wording while stacking slices into carts. See, it stands as regulatory proof that definitions can multiply endlessly while grilled sandwiches continue melting without existential concern. 86. Jell-O, salad with tomato juice, appeared throughout 1950s. Cookbooks instructing hosts to set unflavored gelatin with tomato juice and suspend vegetables inside. It was served cold at dinner parties with absolute seriousness and printed in church and home economics manuals nationwide. Guests sliced into the trembling red block, discovering carrots and celery locked in savory suspension. It represents a collective culinary moment when experimentation outran hesitation. America briefly decided that vegetables deserved to live inside gelatin, and nobody intervened until decades later when everyone quietly agreed to stop. 87. The croissant dog debuted at Disneyland in 2017, wrapping a hot dog inside a flaky croissant and selling it for nearly $10. Visitors photographed it obsessively as if pastry innovation required documentation. The simple act of inserting a sausage into unexpected bread triggered a nationwide trend of similar experiments. Theme park guests waited in lines longer than the hot dog itself. It proved that presentation can elevate even the most familiar ingredients, and that if something looks Instagram-worthy enough, logic about bread compatibility politely steps aside. 88. Trick cereal, launched in 1954, and later switched to real fruit flavors in 1991, only to return to artificial flavors in 2015 after a public vote. Americans literally chose synthetic nostalgia over authenticity, which feels like the most honest outcome possible. The animated rabbit has spent 70 years unsuccessfully attempting to eat the cereal while children consume it freely. Bright colors pour into bowls with cheerful defiance of nutrition charts. It stands as evidence that sentiment often defeats improvement, and that sometimes artificial wins simply because it tastes like childhood memory. 89. New Coke appeared in 1985 when Coca-Cola reformulated its 99-year-old recipe after losing blind taste tests to Pepsi. The reaction was immediate and dramatic, with 400,000 complaint calls flooding the hotline. A psychiatrist hired to listen to recordings reported callers sounded as if they were grieving a death. Within 77 days, Classic Coke returned triumphantly to shelves. It became a landmark marketing lesson, proving that in America, altering a beloved soda can feel less like innovation and more like tampering with national identity. 90. Runts Candy launched in 1982, shaped like small pieces of fruit, with the banana flavor universally mocked as the worst. Internet communities later formed specifically defending banana runts with surprising passion. When the flavor was briefly removed, public outrage forced its return despite its reputation. Children continue sorting through boxes, deciding which shapes deserve immediate consumption. It proves that even the most criticized candy can develop loyal defenders, and that nostalgia can rescue flavors most people claim to dislike loudly in public. 91. Mary Kitchen corned beef hash has been sold in America since 1868 and slides out of the can in one perfectly cylindrical shape, like it just completed a meat obstacle course. Reviewers consistently describe it as looking exactly like what it is, which might be the most honest assessment in canned food history. About 40 million cans sell annually, and the shape has never been redesigned. Home cooks slice and fry the cylinder into crispy squares while pretending the presentation is part of the charm. It proves that familiarity can overpower visual hesitation. 92. The Bloomin' Onion debuted at Outback Steakhouse in 1988, transforming a single onion into a deep-fried flour containing nearly 2,000 calories before the actual meal arrives. Sees servers present it like a trophy centerpiece while diners pull apart petals dipped in sauce without calculating consequences. It became the most ordered appetizer in American casual dining history, selling around 70 million annually. Entire tables gather around it as if participating in ritual. It stands as proof that if vegetables are battered aggressively enough, they no longer behave like vegetables. 93. Gatorade Protein Bars. Launched in 2018 under the authority of a sports drink empire, promising athletic enhancement in solid form. Each bar contained roughly the same protein as a simple glass of milk, yet cost 4 times as much. Marketing targeted athletes who already met their protein needs and assumed branding would close the logic gap. Within 2 years, the bars quietly disappeared from shelves. It became a brief chapter in performance nutrition where price and prestige attempted to replace practicality, but the math eventually spoke louder than the label. 94. Orbit's drinks appeared in 1997 featuring clear liquid filled with floating edible balls suspended using technology borrowed from oil rig drilling fluid. The texture confused consumers who expected beverage but encountered motion. Bottles looked like science projects more than refreshments, and curiosity drove initial sales. Within a year, it vanished from stores, yet unopened bottles now sell for high prices as collectibles. It proved that visual innovation can attract attention. But if a drink requires explanation before the first sip, long-term loyalty becomes difficult to carbonate. 95. Wonder Bread's nutritional enrichment campaign in the 1940s proudly advertised added vitamins after processing had stripped most natural nutrients away. Manufacturers removed fiber and minerals during refining, then reintroduced synthetic versions and called it advancement. Parents bought enriched bread, believing science had upgraded simplicity. The bright packaging emphasized progress while quietly ignoring the circular logic. It stands as one of the most elegant marketing maneuvers in food history, where companies first solved a problem they created and then charged customers for the solution in sandwich form. 96. Pickle pizza surged as an American food trend in 2018, topping traditional dough with dill pickles, garlic sauce, and mozzarella in a combination that sounded like a dare. Then within 12 months, it appeared at thousands of pizza restaurants nationwide. Reviews consistently described it as surprisingly not terrible, which may be the most cautious endorsement possible. Customers approached skeptically and left mildly impressed. It transitioned from internet joke to permanent menu item almost overnight. It proves that if enough people try something out of curiosity, repetition can slowly convert doubt into acceptance. 97. Guida emerged in Cincinnati as a German-inspired loaf, combining pork scraps and oats, similar in spirit to scrapple, but fiercely defended as superior. The rivalry between Cincinnati and Philadelphia, over whose scrap loaf reigns supreme, has persisted for decades. Food historians describe the debate as two cities arguing over who perfected the better mistake. Locals slice and fry it for breakfast with civic pride, while outsiders struggle with the concept. It demonstrates how regional loyalty can transform humble leftovers into cultural identity markers worth defending passionately. 98. Kix cereal, launched in 1937 carrying the slogan, "Kid Tested Mother Approved" for 60 consecutive years. In 1990, the Federal Trade Commission investigated the claim, discovering the testing involved only 50 children in a single mall. The slogan remained unchanged despite the modest sample size. Bowls of puffed corn continued filling breakfast tables nationwide without statistical debate. It stands as evidence that marketing confidence often outweighs methodological rigor, and that once a phrase embeds itself in memory, it can survive far longer than the original data supporting it. 99. Wood Welch's sparkling grape juice positioned itself as alcohol-free champagne for New Year celebrations in American churches and family gatherings. bottles popped with theatrical flair while containing nothing stronger than grape sugar. The product built a $200 million category on the premise of looking celebratory without crossing moral boundaries. Children clinked glasses feeling sophisticated, while adults appreciated the compromise. It remains popular among those who want the aesthetic of champagne without the consequences. It proves presentation alone can transform ordinary juice into symbolic festivity. 100. Bit-O honey candy debuted in 1924 as an almond-flavored taffy so sticky it has reportedly removed dental fillings for a century. Dentists have cited it in professional discussions, while the American Dental Association has never officially addressed the brand by name. Generations continue chewing cautiously yet persistently during long movies and road trips. The candy stretches with determined resistance, refusing to surrender easily. It stands as a chewy endurance test, proving that some sweets are less about flavor and more about commitment to jaw strength and dental bravery. 101. Chef Boyardee Beefaroni, launched in 1957, named after real Italian chef Hector Boiardi, who originally built his reputation on authentic recipes. He sold his name and formula to a company that transformed his dish into a canned pasta experience recognizable by its bright red sauce and soft noodles. Reports suggest Boiardi himself disliked the canned version for the rest of his life, yet his name became permanently attached to it. Generations grew up eating it straight from the tin, believing it represented Italian cuisine. It remains a branding success story with a slightly tragic culinary footnote. 102. Dippin' Dots arrived in 1988, proudly calling themselves the ice cream of the future, served as tiny frozen beads. The concept looked like dessert engineered by astronauts, yet it declared bankruptcy in 2011, proving the future can be financially complicated. Despite that setback, it survives mainly in sports stadiums and amusement parks, where nostalgia and novelty justify premium prices. Children stare at the colorful pellets with fascination while parents calculate cost per spoonful. It stands as proof that sometimes the future does arrive, just exclusively in locations charging theme park admission. 103. Metamucil orange flavor appeared in the 1970s, disguising a fiber supplement as a cheerful citrus drink. Instructions advised consumers to drink it quickly before it thickened into something resembling construction paste. It tasted vaguely orange yet undeniably medicinal, and still generated hundreds of millions in annual sales. Adults stirred the powder into water, with determination focused more on digestive responsibility than flavor enjoyment. It remains one of the few beverages marketed with urgency, not for refreshment, but for timing. Delay too long and the glass transforms into edible cement. 104. Postum's marketing war against coffee lasted 4 decades with CW. Post claiming in national ads that coffee caused insanity, divorce, and business failure. Doctors wrote letters challenging the accusations, and the American Medical Association investigated without finding evidence. Post ignored criticism and continued publishing the same warnings until his death. Families nervously reconsidered their morning mugs while roasted grain beverages filled cupboards. It stands as a relentless example of fear-based advertising, proving that repetition can sustain a claim even when science stands quietly on the sidelines, shaking its head. 105. Cheeseburger in a can appeared in the 2000s, presenting a fully assembled burger sealed inside a metal container like emergency rations. Food bloggers reviewed it with consistent honesty, describing the flavor as exactly what one would expect from bread and meat preserved in tin. The bun emerged slightly compressed, and the cheese obediently melted after reheating. Curiosity drove initial purchases more than hunger. It quietly disappeared without formal announcement, leaving behind only internet reactions. It proved that while Americans enjoy convenience, there are limits to how far the sandwich format can stretch. 106. Ketchup on scrambled eggs evolved into a documented breakfast habit across parts of the Midwest and South. Heinz analyzed grocery purchase data in 2015, discovering nearly a third of Americans regularly combined the two. The company quietly added it to their website as a suggested use, as if the pairing had always been intentional. Critics argue eggs deserve salt and pepper, while supporters drizzle red enthusiasm across yellow curds without apology. It demonstrates how repetition can normalize combinations that once seemed questionable until data confirms they were common all along. 107. Alligator sausage became a recognized American product in the 1980s as alligator farming expanded into a $70 million industry in Louisiana. What once felt exotic gradually appeared on mainstream grocery shelves in Florida, Louisiana, and Texas by 2000. Shoppers examined the packaging with curiosity balanced by regional pride. Restaurants added it to menus, positioning it as adventurous yet approachable. It illustrates how quickly novelty can shift into normality once supply chains stabilize, and marketing frames reptile protein as simply another option in the meat department. 108. Grape nuts flakes were introduced in the 1930s as a supposedly softer alternative to the original grape nuts, which had a reputation for cracking teeth. Dentists reportedly observed patients struggling with the original pellets, prompting a gentler reformulation. Despite the adjustment, the cereal still contained neither grapes nor nuts, maintaining its tradition of factual optimism. Bowls required serious chewing commitment even in flake form. It stands as a reminder that sometimes a product evolves not for flavor but for dental survival, while the misleading name remains confidently unchanged. 109. Our Surge soda launched in 1996 with high caffeine and aggressive marketing aimed directly at energetic teenagers. It sold millions before being discontinued in 2002, sparking a 12-year fan campaign, including a billboard placed outside Coca-Cola headquarters. The persistence paid off when the company relaunched it exclusively online in 2014 to immediate sellout demand. The revival demonstrated that brand loyalty can survive long dormancy if nostalgia ferments properly. It stands as one of the clearest examples of consumers refusing to let a neon beverage quietly disappear. 110. Space Dust Candy debuted in 1975 as a finer powdered evolution of Pop Rocks designed to explode energetically on the tongue. Unfortunately, its name sounded alarmingly similar to a street drug, which prompted concerned parents to contact lawmakers in a wave of panic. The manufacturer simply renamed it Cosmic Candy and continued selling the identical product without altering the formula. Children kept pouring it into their mouths, unfazed by legislative drama. It proves that sometimes rebranding solves controversy faster than reformulation, when the candy itself remains enthusiastically loud. 111. Pork rinds grew into a billion-dollar American snack industry consisting of deep-fried pigskin, delivering little beyond protein and fat. In 1988, President George H.W. Bush publicly declared them his favorite snack, causing sales to jump 11% within a single month. One interview effectively revived an entire category, as shoppers filled carts with crackling bags, influenced by presidential preference. The industry openly credits that endorsement with saving them from decline. It stands as a remarkable example of how powerful a single statement can be when attached to crunchy national visibility. And that was just a glimpse into the beautifully chaotic buffet of decisions America has proudly chewed through for over a century. From aerosol cheese to canned cheeseburgers, these inventions did not just exist, they thrived, they sold millions. And some are still waiting for you in aisle 7 right now. So here's the real question. Which one would you actually be brave enough to try, and which one should be permanently exiled from human history? Comment your pick below. Hit like if your stomach survived this list. Yeah, subscribe to Dumb History for more unbelievable stories. And tap into the end screen because the next video might be even weirder.